ARE Podcast, episode number 19.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. ARE Podcast, where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host. His favorite soundtrack is The Cook, The Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, David Doucette.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the ARE Podcast. We're here at episode number 19, and we are going to talk all about big firm versus small firm, and joined by my co-host, Eric Corey Freed, and we're just going to jump right into the topic. I'm not even going to give Eric a chance to say hi, even though he just waved for the attention. Let's jump right into this. So we're going to talk about big firm versus small firm. That's to you.
Wow, that's terrible segue. Hi everybody. Today I want to go through some of the perceptions and misperceptions of the difference between a large firm and a small firm, and there are pros and cons to each one. And I'm kind of in an unusual situation in that I, throughout my early career, especially when I was going through IDP and the AREs, I was in a deliberately small firm, and then worked in large firms, and then went back to small firms, and then even ran my own practice as a small firm, and now I'm back at a big firm. So I flip-flop back and forth. So I can talk about the pros and cons of each, I think, quite well, as opposed to David, who rock climbs all day, every day, and probably can't remember.
Yeah, I don't even. What's a firm?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll tell my story too after we go through the pros and cons. But a majority of my experience has been in a small firm. But I did work for the biggest firm you could probably work for was the federal government and the General Services Administration for my first year. But and I think this is actually a great show because a lot of this could be related to your own personality, like we talked about on the last episode, is just having a sense of our personality. Certain personalities might work better in a big firm setting or in a small firm setting. So I'm excited to jump in on this first. So do we want to talk? Let's talk about a big firm. We'll talk about the pros first, but what exactly is a big firm? How many people do we need to make a big firm a big firm?
Well, by definition, the AIA even has definitions on a small firm versus, medium firm and big firm. For the case of this, I'm kind of lumping in medium size and big firms together, which in this case would be 20 people or over would be considered a big firm or medium sized firm. And of course, there are the big firms, which is over 100 people. Some firms have, I have friends that work at 800 person type firms. But there starts to be a kind of a point where they blur together. And so for the sake of the talk today, I really think that we should focus on kind of the generalities of the pros and cons of each one. Because really my hope from this is that it really helps the listener, you guys, determine what would be best for you given your personality and given your career goals.
What are the big firms that you can think of off the top of your head, like 3 or 4 that come to mind of what we think of as the big firms?
Well, the big firms, the ones that come to mind for me is firms like Gensler, HOK, SOM, Smith Group, multiple offices, usually with an international presence, and each office might have 100 or more, where it's almost a giant architectural machine. Those are big firms. And then you have medium firms. There's a lot more of these, and those tend to have maybe 1 or 2 offices. Whereas Gensler might have an office in LA and San Francisco and Chicago and New York. A medium firm might just have the office in LA, but their size might be the same, and they might even compete against Gensler for certain projects of certain types. But overall, Gensler has something like 1,600 employees. They're the largest architecture firm in the world in terms of billings and revenue. A medium-sized firm, 20 to 100 people would be much smaller buildings, but big enough where you might not even get a chance to work with everybody. That to me is already big.
Okay, so let's jump into the pros of the big firm. We got 5 or 6 here. We are going to discuss what's the first or what's the most obvious pro of working in a big firm.
Well, the generalization with a big firm is that big firm equals big projects. So with a big firm, you tend to work on larger projects, those skyscrapers and, $300 million developments and with multiple phases and parts, that kind of thing. Let
me stop you there because that sounds fascinating. And as a young intern, I now have visions of getting hired by one of these big firms, and I'm going to be in on design meetings, and I'm going to be doing renderings and modeling, and I'm going to be an integral part of the design process. Is that true?
Well, now you've kind of come upon the rub, the irony of the big firm. Part of the reason why a big firm is able to handle such big projects is because there's more of you. So an intern would probably be put in charge of, let's say, bathroom elevations, and you would be drawing all of the interior elevations for all of the bathrooms, and that would be your big task that might take you 3 or 4 weeks to do. And then those get redlined, and there's so much work to do on a project of those sizes that that you're not going to get to touch everything. That's that's one of the cons actually of a big firm, is that you do tend to be in a department. You do tend to be much more pigeonholed. You do have to kind of work your way up a ladder because there is a ladder that's very clearly put in front of you. So so while the benefit is you get to work on these giant projects, the con is that you might not even stay on that project all the way through, let alone get to touch every piece of it.
Okay, so let's stay on the pros. So the first pro is we have larger projects, which is exciting and cool, and then we have more financial stability because these bigger firms are bigger machines, and for all intents and purposes, they're like corporations at some level.
Well, they probably literally are corporations in that they're incorporated, but there's I think the financial stability part is a bit of a yes, there's more financial stability in that they probably are able to cover their bills and their overhead for longer periods of time, but their overhead and bills are probably so much more than a small firm would be. So there's certainly the perception of financial stability in that you don't know if anything's going wrong. I mean, unless massive layoffs start happening, generally speaking, friends of mine that have worked at a large firm and then suddenly got laid off because of work slowdowns, most of them had no notice, So there's the appearance of financial stability in that, flowers are being delivered to the front desk and there's snacks in the meeting rooms and, and all the normal benefits that you get are still there. So you kind of, you're disconnected or disassociated with where's the money going. You're not seeing the billings. You're probably not even seeing the contracts, let alone the proposals or even the RFPs, depending on what department you're in. So, projects just appear in a big firm, and you're not quite sure where they come from or how they got there.
Yeah, and oftentimes you'll be in your own little bubble on your little design team, taking direction from probably the job captain, and you really won't know. It'll take you a while before you figure out what other projects the firm is working on. You'll just have your little world of bathroom elevations and maybe some stair elevations and hotel room elevations or whatever else it is. So, okay, so one, we tend to work on larger projects. That's a plus. 2, more financial stability. 3, what's 3?
Well, 3 is you get more perks. You get support for things like you'd actually have an HR, human resources department. You would have somebody who's in charge of ordering office supplies, and they would just appear there. And if you needed something special, like if you said, I need a standing desk, go order, there's somebody that would take care of that for you. It would just be handled. There's administrative staff. There might even be marketing staff. You might even have specialty staff like an in-house web designer, an in-house IT person.
By the way, just a job tip here, because of our audience and our young architect audience, if you start a new job at a big firm, don't go in the first week and demand a stand-up desk because it's probably not going to happen. Eric likes to sugarcoat things a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because we have that issue happening now at my firm where my staff was saying, man, I want a stand-up desk because so-and-so got one too. And yeah, that's good advice. You're going to wait it out for a couple of weeks, warm things up before you start demanding anything, really.
And
you'd have.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, but you'd have these little this kind of support staff. You'd have a receptionist, for instance, whereas a small firm might not need one or let alone be able to afford one. And then there's kind of other perks for things like there might even be one of those Friday or Sunday softball leagues where you all kind of dress up and go play softball against other large to medium sized firms. And so there's a lot of these perks, and for a lot of people they like that structure and they like having that kind of infrastructure behind them.
It's very much like it's like another kind of business corporation. Basically, it's run like a business. Like you go to any other sort of corporate business, it's very much how these big firms are run. Yeah, they're doing design and all that stuff, but there's definitely a corporate structure to them and that sort of corporate hierarchy and cubicles and all that stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And there's even people to take care of these things to make sure that you can do your job and do it well. There's, if you take a firm like a Gensler, right? Just in each individual office, they might have a department just for sustainability and have people that on staff that are just their sustainability experts or doing lead rating system stuff. They might have in-house graphic designers to do pretty covers. They'll certainly have 3D people to do gorgeous renderings of the things that someone else designs. So you'd have these you'd have this support system, and really to enable you to do your job and do it well. But it comes at a price because having a support system like that means that you're also stuck doing a certain number of things that people are expecting you to do. So you wouldn't get to do everything. So for certain people, they love that, having that support, and other people don't.
If I'm just thinking just off the top of my head, based on the pros so far, thinking back to our last episode with the disc personality, it seems like the C and the S types, the types who like stability and predictability, could very much excel in a big firm.
Yeah, usually it requires somebody who almost wants to be freed up to do their job, where they don't want to worry about things like how the business is run, for instance. Whereas when I ran my firm, and when certainly I worked for small firms, everybody did everything, including ordering the plotting paper because we're out, and or worse, ordering the toilet paper because we're out, and the last person to use the roll puts it on the list and then goes and gets it. It's that kind of thing. But some people, I really, as a small firm owner, I very much enjoyed that level of intimacy and feeling of family in a certain sense. Whereas a big firm, I felt like it was a job.
Yeah, but now I'm thinking that the I's too, are social butterflies. They would do well in a big firm, or they could do well in a big firm because there's a lot of people around. There's a lot of water cooler talk on Monday morning type stuff.
Well, I have, I totally, as an introvert, as an extroverted person, I agree with you. For me, it was very easy to get distracted working, especially at big, large firms, and all the people and all the stories, and every day you can go to lunch with somebody new, kind of thing. That's kind of fun and exciting too.
So another pro is, as we mentioned earlier, you could have multiple offices, which gives us, more opportunity to maybe grow or to move to another city if we're sort of, if we're single, living the bachelor life. It's not a bad idea. We could check out Chicago for a little while. We could check out LA or Dubai, international.
Absolutely, and it's kind of interesting because NCARB last year implemented the exam in Dubai, in that there's certain locations in the UAE that you could take the exam because they knew that a lot of these people working at large firms would be stationed in overseas for a year at a time, and that would affect their rolling clock. And I have a lot of friends that totally took advantage of this. They started off in the Washington D.C. office, and then moved to the Chicago office, and then eventually made their way to the San Francisco office. And so they got to live a very exciting life with the same firm. And as they explain it, although their employer is still the same name on their paycheck, going to a new firm in a new city is a whole new experience for them. They're working with people that they probably never even met before. So there's all these new friends to make and all these new experiences to uncover.
And then the last one we have here for the pro of the big firm is brand name recognition, which, is important or can be important.
For a lot of people, this is a very big deal. They love to, on their resume, have a big brand name. And then there's even a kind of a subset of that where they don't just want a brand name like SOM or HOK. They want a brand name like Frank Gehry. They want a kind of a famous, known for design brand.
Like a designer brand, like a designer brand name.
Totally, a designer brand. So, and they use this quite well. They realize that these famous people have large firms and they are brands. And so, I have a good friend. I won't mention her name, but I have a good friend who worked for Frank Gehry, and it's on every bio that she doesn't work there in, I don't know, 15 years now. But every bio, everywhere she's introduced, it's always mentioned. And I hear the crowd when they read off her bio, they go, "Ooh."
Is he paying? Is he paying his interns now? By the way.
Oh, I have no idea.
I've always heard that rumor that he doesn't. I don't know. Could have changed. It's 20 years ago. All right, so those are our pros. We got a couple of cons here, and the first one is because these projects are so big and so massive that oftentimes we don't even get to see the entire project all the way through. So oftentimes there's not a beginning. We're not involved in the project from beginning to end. We're involved, especially at sort of this young architect level, doing toilet rooms and toilet elevations, maybe some stairs. Then that project gets moved out, and then another one comes in where we're probably doing the same thing.
Right, or worse, you're pigeonholed even further in that you're doing just blanket specs, and
right.
You're pulling together specs for something, and it's pretty brutal. But you're also not seeing the entire project all the way through, because some of these projects go on for 5, 6, 7 years. And so you don't stay long enough at the firm to even see it through. But also there's just the old, kind of moving of staff resources around, where when a project's busy, you might get thrown onto it and be on it for 6 months and then jump onto something else as you're not needed. So, oftentimes firms will even build up almost a campsite, a fireside chat type of thing, or a Friday, happy hour. So, 4:00 on a Friday, they'll break out the wine and some drinks, and they'll start to share what's on the boards. It's kind of a common thing that happens at a big firm, because there is no way to know what everybody's working on unless you're kind of, poking your head around and bothering people. So they'll often build these mechanisms to enable you to kind of understand what else is going on. There's
one of, I think, the drawbacks of a big firm is, especially if you're a good employee, they're going to find out you're a good employee. You're going to shine above the other employees. And unfortunately, you'll be more prone to keep doing whatever you're shining on, because you're so good at it, and you're so efficient that it makes sense for them dollar for dollar to keep you doing that, because you're so efficient, and that's where they're making money from you, rather than to pull you somewhere else, because now they got to fill that void of that you do something so well.
Yeah, that's especially true if you find a technical niche that you're really good at. So, for instance, you'll see this all the time: the guy that's out on the field, or the guy that goes through specs, or the guy that goes through shop drawings. And he might be awesome at it, and he's like the kind of guy that just knows. Every firm has at least one of these guys, or girls, but just knows every single thing about details that you can imagine. There's always a detail person, and they're in charge of just cranking out details, and it's all they do all day. And to me, I would just be so bored, I'd jump out of a window. But they're known for that, and the firm almost can't afford to move them out because there's nobody good enough to replace them. And so, you almost want to be political about what you're revealing that you're great at. Because, for me, when I was an intern, I was really terrified of getting pigeonholed or being stuck being the CAD jockey or the interior detail guy. I really wanted to get exposure to everything, and I was very vocal about that desire.
It's very much you're playing a chess game a little bit in a big firm versus not so much in a small firm. Because there's just so many more players in the big firm. And then our last con here is there's no transparency in the future of the firm. We don't know where the projects are coming. We don't know where the people are coming from. Oftentimes we don't know who the clients are, or if we know them, we're not going to meet them. So it is in a bit of a vacuum.
You'll get an all-staff meeting that morning, or all-staff email that morning saying, hey, heads up, tidy up your desk because a big important client's going to walk through at 2 p.m. and you won't even know who it is.
Right.
And then you'll see a bunch of people in nice suits kind of pass through, and then and then you might never see them again.
And it's like you got to be at your desk. It's like, hey, Eric, make sure you're at your desk at 2:00. You have to be there, even if you don't have anything to do. You got to be at your desk.
Yeah, you want to look like it's staffed up, So it's. There's a lot of things like that where you are disconnected from knowing. Whereas in a small firm, when I lost a project because of the economy, for instance, right? Everyone knew about it because there were 8 of us. So I told them, it was very transparent in that regard, in that they knew when we were hurting or we knew we were struggling or when we were getting new things, because it was just, there was a small group of us and I was able to share everything very quickly and very easily.
Yeah, and if you are the type that likes to understand the big picture and always kind of know things from beginning to end, you might struggle a little bit in a big firm because you're not going to get the big picture. Even if you sort of try and seek it out, it's going to be hard to get that. Before we get into the small firm, one thing I'll mention is a majority of my experience has been in a small firm. I worked for the federal government when I was like 20, the General Services Administration, which is basically their real estate division. Did like space planning and stuff there for a year before I got my first real job in an architecture firm of about 15 people. And I don't have any regrets because I've always been a big picture kind of person, and I've always enjoyed projects from beginning to end, and knowing how to take it from programming and schematic design all the way through to the building department, all that stuff. However, I think as somebody in their 20s, as a young architect, the better experience I think would be in a big firm in terms of just getting the exposure, because it's like you're dating, and you don't want to jump around jobs too often. What I think every 2 years is sort of the general acceptable practice. But I think the 20s is a good time to do that, as we're already talking. You might be single, you might not have a lot of attachments, so you can bounce around the country or bounce around the world. The 20s are a perfect time for that because it's going to be a lot harder in our 40s.
Well, not only that, at a big firm, you'll make friends because there's more people to meet and more types of people, and you might meet someone attractive that you want to spend a lot more time with. There's a lot of
I don't. I stay out of that stuff. No office romances.
But a large firm certainly has benefits. But it's funny. Especially when I was younger, I was adamant about a small firm because I was hooked very early in that. My first job was in a small firm. It was 15 people, and I got to do everything. And there were some days where I was in a windowless room running blueprints all day, but then there were days where I was running detail sheets or running. Remember sticky backs? When I was running, I'd run these sticky backs off the copy machine, or doing base drawings for things like reflected ceiling plans and electrical plans. And there were times when they let me design. They would say, "Oh yeah, we just want to crank out 50 vignettes of little sketches of how this canopy could be. So go." And I would,
right.
And so they were very supportive of that. And very supportive of my idea that I really wanted to see it from stem to stern. And so after that, I was hooked.
Yeah, that I think that's a bit of an addictive thing, and that's always what has attracted me. I think I was 24 and managing projects, and most of them were sort of interior build outs, but they were a few $1,000,000, and that was a pretty big deal when you're 24. So I've always gravitated to the small firm and learned a bunch doing that. So let's talk about the small firm. Let's talk about the pros. We've already kind of started talking about that, but the first one I think is getting to see the project come through the door and you see it through completion. What do you think of that one?
Well, that was true. The firm, when I say firm, the office I worked for in Santa Fe, which was me and a guy named Ed, which is the two of us. I mean, that was it. So, there would be a knock at the door, and it would be some couple. Yeah, we want you to build our house. And it's like, okay, great, and let's talk about it. And then, a year later, you're at the party, kind of thing. It would go very quickly, and so you got to see the whole thing. You got to see every phase of it. Plus, with a small firm, not only you get to see the project come in the door, but you're probably also known for a certain project type. So at any point, you might have 5 concurrent projects going on at the same time in different phases. So in the one hand, you're still in schematic design on one, let's say house, or if you're doing restaurants, right? You're in schematic design early on. Another one might be under construction, and you're doing punch lists and going through and doing field reports. And in another sense, you're just in CDs cranking out working drawings. And so the beauty of a small firm is that it might be the same project type, but you really get a deep level of expertise and get to see it all the way through in every phase. And so you're learning faster, and you're building your confidence a lot faster in terms of your professional abilities.
And it's kind of, on many levels, I think, more exciting and just more fun because you're multitasking. You're in like 5 or 6 projects at once. They're all in different phases, just like you're mentioning. And Evernote just resynced and took my bullets out. Did it do it to you? That's weird.
Yeah.
Why would they do that, Evernote? So, and I think one of the attractions for me, and one of the hooks for me in my 20s was going to a job site and seeing like metal framing and seeing like, oh my God, this is what it looks like, and just like you're just like in awe of it. So the construction side has always been special to me, and that's something that in a big firm, typically you got to work there a few years before they're even going to let you on the construction site. So that was my big joy, and kind of always has been, just seeing the stuff built.
I remember my first job being on a job site, and it was a remodel of an old multifamily building, and so it was in demolition. And I remember seeing the exposed metal framing, and I was thinking, oh, it's just like the drawing. It's just like it's just like in the book. It was almost like spotting a celebrity in a way. I could identify. And I also remember when they poured the foundation, they had the rebar coming up, and then they had the orange safety caps on the top of the rebar. Right. And I remember that wasn't in the book, so I remember asking the contractor, I'm like, what's with the caps? I guess if I thought for a second, I would have figured it out. But right. I said, what's with the orange caps on top of the rebar? And he said, oh, so if you trip, you don't like gouge your face out, kind of thing. And just like, oh my God, I love that. I was so excited about it.
Yeah, it's. I think you hit it on the head. This sort of celebrity sighting. It's like that. Like you get giddy, you go there, and it's like, wow. Like, because you're drawing this stuff, and let's face it, when we're sort of early in our careers, we don't really know entirely what we're drawing. We try and hope we do, but we don't know exactly what it looks like. And I remember, my first real boss, Lee, he would just crank out these details by hand, and I'd be like trying to figure it out, or I'd show him a detail that I worked like a couple hours on, and I'd show it to him thinking it's correct, and he starts marking it up, and I'm like, how does he see that? But you do, and I think just going to the job site and just seeing it opens your eyes up tremendously.
Absolutely, yeah. And I remember, the beauty of a small firm is, I'd work on the drawing, work on some phase of some project all day, and then maybe in the afternoon run over to a job site, take some photos, and then come back and it was a very comprehensive experience for me. And so that was much more important than things like money or
Right.
working on larger projects. Because I should say, and this, I guess we get this into the cons, generally, yes, you get more experience, but you're paying a price for it, and that you're probably generally getting paid a little less.
Yeah, you're getting paid a little less, and you also could be getting pigeonholed there as well, because you're going to be working on pretty much the same project type, because that's what your small firm is going to be known for, whether it's residential or banks or whatever it is. But one of the most important things to me, and something that always attracted me to the small firm, is you do get more responsibility, you get more freedom. So it's a perfect spot for like a high D or even a high I, because you can really create sort of your own experience in these small firms.
Yeah, you could really, this firm that was my first job, there was a guy there named Mark, and Mark was a weirdo. He was a weird guy. You come up to him and ask him for, hey, do you have the file on the, and he'd go, meh, he was just strange. He's a strange weirdo, and he had toys all over. I hope he's not listening because he'll get mad at me, but he had toys all over his desk. Now, a guy like this they would never put up with this at a large firm.
Right.
Right? They'd get rid of him right away. But at a small firm, he was, he did his job and he did it well. So you overlooked his idiosyncrasies, with his weirdness. And I learned a lot from him. He was funny, but just bizarre.
Well, as we've talked about before in other episodes about how to be a more valuable employee and such, is, as you and I both know, there's not a lot of great employees out there. There might be a lot of good employees, but there's not a lot of great employees. So I think when a small firm owner finds somebody who's really motivated and driven, they're going to stand out. They're not going to be in a firm. If it's a 10-person firm, not all 10 are going to be driven and motivated. Probably 8 will just be going through the motions, and 2 will be driven and motivated. So if you're that type of personality, it's a great opportunity, because you're going to get stuff handed to you fairly quickly, and you're going to get responsibility. I'm talking within a couple of years, you should be getting some really good responsibility.
Not only that, but you'd get more freedom to try out new things. I mean, it's a relationship of trust. I had a lot of great staff, and I had a lot of bad staff, and there were kind of no in between. It was kind of one or the other. Maybe because my expectations were high, but the great staff, I had this woman, Jessica, who I just adore. I'm still friends with her, but I adored her. And she said, okay, I want to study for the AREs now. Great, I'll pay for it. Because I wanted her to stay. I wanted to invest in her. And
Exactly.
I wanted her to feel that your home is here. And you can take off early on these days so you can go study, because I had a vested interest in her professional development because we were so close. So I absolutely agree with you.
And what I liked about it too, again, I'm thinking of our audience, we're young architects here. We're in our 20s, some of us in our early 20s. We actually get to introduce new ideas, and we get to make a difference. Like, we can actually go to our boss, the principal, right, who we're not probably going to really talk to at the big firm, but we get to go and make suggestions. Or it's cool when you're working on a project and your boss turns to you and be like, well, what do you think? And you have sort of a resolution to it. It's empowering. I think working in a small firm is a very empowering experience.
And it was be very common that where you could make suggestions and they would not only be listened to, but you'd be given permission to implement them. So a really simple example of that is you might say to your principal or your boss, I want to organize a lunch and learn where every Wednesday, every week, we'll have a sales rep come in and they'll bring us a box of lunch, and I'll organize it. I just want to bring in more knowledge, or I want to order these materials for the materials library because I want us to start using them. As a young person in a small firm, you can just do that. You almost don't even need to ask. You can just kind of run with it because it's an all hands on deck situation in a small firm. Everybody's doing a little bit of everything. So I remember we had an intern and she redesigned the plotter log. In other words, the sheet that we made notes on of what got plotted and for who, because it was before they had software that tracked the billing for that. So we just had a manual, and she thought it was ugly, so she redesigned it. And I just love that. It's like, great. So, perfect.
It definitely, a small firm encourages you to be more proactive because your proactiveness is often rewarded. Where in a big firm, sometimes the proactive, because they're in such their mode and they got their way of doing things, they're stuck in sort of their mold that in some respects they don't necessarily encourage you to be proactive. They just kind of want you to do your job that you're given.
Right. So, it's not, I know we're in this talking about small firm now, so I don't want to just completely denigrate large firms because they, as we did cover, they do have perks. But with a small firm, there's even subtle things that are just different. So, for instance, let's say there's a piece of software that you used at school, like SketchUp or Rhino or something, and you come to this firm and they're not using it. In a small firm, you could easily get everybody excited about it and almost maybe even do like a lunch training where you just teach everybody and have them start playing with it. Right. And implement it immediately. In a large firm, well, there's got to be a committee and there's got to be notes and there's got to be discussion and a vote and you got to, and then you got to buy licenses for everybody. So that's a big expenditure for a large firm. So it needs to get approval and that takes months. And, the bureaucracy of a large firm could be painful. Whereas at a small firm, that lack of structure could work in your favor if your personality is so inclined to that.
Yep. I would still, if you're listening sort of in your 20s, I would definitely give the big firm a shot if you're not already there, because I just think the 20s are sort of a good time to do that. Because I think a big firm could be pretty cool for all of the things that we talked about. Now you have, so introverts, extroverts, what are we talking here? We talked about those last week. The D and the I are the extroverts, the introverts being the S and the C. Where do they fit into this big firm, small firm?
Well, with a small firm, it's better for introverts generally. It's better for those who might be politically incorrect or not as marketable, right? The weirdos. And that's a generalization, but also those who just want more experience. I'd like to think that, in a certain sense, my small firm was a graduate school for those that wanted to have their own firm someday. They really wanted to experience everything, and they did. They got to see the contracts and the proposals and the invoices, and because I was the one doing it, I didn't have a controller sending out invoices and stuff. It was me. So
you just hit something on the head that we haven't mentioned yet. That
I did.
That people in a small firm, oftentimes they want to see how a business runs because they want to have their own firm. And that was kind of my goal very early on in high school, was to have my own firm by the time I turned 32. It wasn't necessarily a burning desire, but that was a goal I set. But in order for me to do that, obviously, I had to get a lot of small firm experience. I never had grand visions of having a gigantic, big firm of my own. I wanted a small sort of boutique firm. So that's where sort of my job opportunities gravitated in my 20s.
Yeah, me too. I felt the same way. But even before architecture school, saying I want to have my own firm someday. I might not even know why, but I just knew I wanted that freedom. I wanted that, lack. I didn't want to be in a 9-to-5 situation and have to wear a tie and someone was expecting me to show up every day. And, I knew I wanted that freedom. So that way I could learn what I needed to learn and see what I needed to see.
What's interesting now, I'm thinking you're in actually a bigger firm environment now, but if something happened and I had to go get an architecture job, I probably couldn't get a job in a big firm right now. I wouldn't be qualified in terms of the work they would want me to do versus what I would need to make at 44 years old. Like it it wouldn't balance out.
Well, not only that, and I can tell you this from direct experience. For several years, I had long conversations with large firms that I'm friends with, and we were working out, because I got to the point after 20 years that I was sick of being on my own. And that could be a whole other story or podcast. But for 3 years, I was looking for a large firm to join forces with, where I could say, okay, I've got all this great experience and this wealth of knowledge, but I can't do it alone anymore. I need to do it with a team, and I want to apply what I learned about inspiring and managing people to a larger firm. And the large firm said to me, and this was said by multiple large firms, many of which you guys, the audience, have heard of, so I won't mention their names, said to me, you've never worked in a large corporate firm. You wouldn't fit in here. There was a lot of that. Yeah. Like, we're worried that you're too entrepreneurial, that you're too used to just doing things on your own. We've had issues in the past with sole proprietors coming in and they don't really fit into our culture. And it was a huge issue. They liked other things about me, but they did not like the fact that I had never really worked in a corporate firm environment.
Well, I think,
and it was a mark against me.
For sure. And I think the corporate culture, just in general, not in an architecture firm, but in any sort of corporation type business, I think it's geared towards and set up for really a lot of followers. They don't want a bunch of leaders in the ranks. They want leaders to lead the teams, but a corporation works when everybody sort of just does what they're told, and the big decisions come from upper management or the upper level. So you would be a disruptor. You or I would be a disruptor if a big firm hired us, because we would just have too many new ideas, or they couldn't control us, basically.
Right, which is why I ended up taking a senior level position, because if I was just in the ranks running projects, they knew full well that I would, I'd end up breaking something. I'd end up running us off the road to try new weird things. So I get it.
All right, so we covered pros and cons of the big firm, pros and cons of the small firm. What's your take?
Well,
go ahead.
There's one more I just thought of to mention, which is, in a small firm, it's almost like having one kid, in that, because you have two boys, and if you say, who broke this lamp, they could just point to each other. At a small firm, there is none of that scapegoating, because it's right. Like, okay, it's one of you six people, right? In a large firm, here's a great example. The other day, someone in the kitchen, someone had brought in cookies, and in the kitchen, someone left one cookie because they didn't want to eat the cookie and then have to clean the plate. So they just lazily left one cookie on a plate. And so I took a picture of it and I sent it to all staff saying, really? And that's all I put. Because at a big firm, you could just do that and no one will notice.
Right.
And the guy that did it confessed. I guilted him into confessing.
He did.
Yeah, but you can, whereas in a small firm, that would never happen. We look, come on, man, eat that last cookie and clean the plate.
Right.
So there's no one else to blame at a small firm. It's like one of you guys, and if the phone rings, one of you has to answer it. And that also kind of extends to, you end up being a very tight-knit team, because you can't afford to have any dead weight. You can't afford to have a slacker. And this has happened. I had a staff of 8, and if we had a slacker, that's over 12% of the workforce, right?
Right.
If you've got one slacker, so it doesn't work. They would drum that person out like crazy. They would make it known they're not pulling their weight, and something would have to change. And the feedback would happen immediately.
Yeah, and I think a small firm definitely encourages responsibility. It encourages ownership in such a sort of strong way that doesn't quite happen in a big firm. Now, if you're in a big firm and you're moving up the ranks, I think that's a little different. You're obviously given more responsibility and more pressures and all that stuff. But as somebody in their 20s working in a big firm, you're not going to get the kind of responsibility that you'll get in a small firm, although you'll be working on bigger projects. So it's the
Right.
trade-off. So I think big firm, small firm experience, try and get both. There's no reason not to. And even you can just go interview. Like if you're at a big firm now and you're thinking about a small firm, just go on a bunch of small firm interviews. You don't have to take the job, but you'll learn a lot just by going in the interview. You'll see the office. You'll get a sense. You'll be interviewing with the principal, not, human resources who screened you first. And I always like that process too. So what would your advice be to our listeners on the big firm, small firm thing in their 20s? Where should they be working?
Well, I think if you can get experience at both, all the better. It also helps if you know what kind of project type you're really passionate about. For me, I was passionate about residential, so I almost didn't have a choice. It was only later that I started to get itchy for other project types like schools and hospitality, and it ended up backfiring because after 20 years of doing residential, I became known as the residential guy. So it made it even harder for me to switch or get a name because I was already known for something. So if you can balance it by getting both, great. And part of the way to do that is with just being smarter about your results. Don't talk about what you want. And we've talked about this before in terms of resumes and cover letters too, but don't talk about what you want. Talk about what you can do for the firm. Your cover letter, even just getting an informational interview, you're just there to kind of show what you could do for them. Make it about them and research what they do, but do it knowing that it's fitting into some larger vision you have of your goal. If you want to work on school projects, well, there are small firms that do schools and there are large firms that do schools. So maybe that's your way to kind of bridge both and try out both without really disrupting your career path, right? You can still build a nice portfolio and a nice reputation working on school projects, but get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I would, I guess, leave it with, date in your 20s. Don't marry anybody. Don't marry a job. Don't marry a firm in your 20s, because it's all about sort of figuring out what interests you. And then in your 30s is when you sort of really come into, okay, now let me kind of perfect where I am. And I've heard this before, like in your 20s, you're trying to figure out what you want to do. Your 30s, you really perfect doing it, and your 40s are really your prime earning years where now you're actually making money doing what you've spent the last 20 years doing.
Right. I think you and I are both living proof of that.
Of which. All right. I think, anything else before we wrap up?
I think we can't wrap up this totally without mentioning one more thing, which is the ultimate question hovering over your heads right now. And that is, so which is better for studying for the ARE, or better yet, passing the ARE? What would be better in terms of completing IDP and completing the ARE, a big firm or a small firm? And again, there's pros and cons. With a large firm, they might pay for your exam. In fact, they might even pay for your study materials. Or better yet, they might even have study materials lying around that you can use or reference.
Or they'll have a study group.
Or they'll also have a study group. But the truth is, in a small firm,
but they won't have our materials laying around because they don't work like that.
They're digital. But with a small firm, the truth is, you could make your own study group. And as we've already seen, if you can prove your value and have a relationship with your boss at a small firm, you can convince them to cover the cost of your area, because it is expensive.
And you already mentioned that you had an employee in your small firm that you saw the value in it. You paid for ARE. Just because we're in a small firm doesn't mean like, oh, our boss doesn't have money to invest in me. They do. You just have to ask. And aren't you doing a blog post about this coming up?
Yeah, and it's almost like a large firm might have a policy in a staff employee manual that says clearly anyone taking the ARE, and they might let you they'll pay for one version of the test. So if you fail, you got to and you retake it, you might have to pay on your own for the second one. They might have a policy that's that specific. Whereas at a small firm, there's no policy. So you could kind of make up your own rules, like Jessica did, where she said, I want to take the ARE, and I said, boom, I'll pay for it.
Well, and also let's talk about the small firm for a second. ARE, let's say there's 10 people in a small firm. I can guarantee you all 10 people are not taking the ARE. There's only going to be a couple. There might be 2. So if you are one of the 2, or you're one of the 10, basically, your boss should be very receptive that you want to get licensed. If your boss is not, that may be a sign to look for a new job, because they're not into mentoring you, which is, they should be enthusiastic about you going through the ARE process. I'm glad you mentioned that.
To me, the key to success of any firm, but especially a small firm, is that you can't run a small firm and not be a mentor. In my opinion, I think the two go hand in hand. And there are times certainly when I failed at that, and there are times when I was always trying to get better at it. But my goal was to mentor them, and even now at a relatively large firm, my goal was to mentor the staff and encourage them to, with their career goals and their path forward. And so, is there one that's better for the area, large firm or small firm? I think it really depends on how you go about explaining your goals and how you show your value to the firm.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, and also I don't think they're unrelated. I don't think, I got my ARE life over here and I got my small firm job, or my ARE life over here and my big firm job. They are related, and they should be related, and they should somehow be embraced in your workplace.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, that's going to wrap it up for us today. On behalf of Eric Corey Freed, my name is David Doucette. Thank you for checking out episode number 19.
Thanks for listening to the ARE Podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog. Remember to plan, practice, and pass.